Iran could be set to send more weapons to Russia for use in its war against Ukraine, including attack drones and short-range ballistic missiles. That is according to media reports. Now, Ukraine's military says that it has so far managed to shoot down around 300 Iranian drones, but others have managed to get through defences, which raises the question, how should the international community, including the likes of the United States, respond to Iran's drone and missile transfers? Well, we can bring in now Behnam Ben Talebou, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, where he focuses on Iranian security and political issues. Welcome to you. Great to have you with us. Now, before we talk about what the response should be from the international community, just talk to us a little bit about the impact of these weapons, these drones in particular.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. In short, these weapons are having a significant battlefield impact, but they haven't decidedly changed the local battlefield equation for the Russians, which have a lot of logistical issues when you look at their supply lines and the way they're fighting against Ukrainian efforts to clear, take, and hold back some of their cities in occupied elements of Ukraine. The way the Russians, and particularly based on the way the Iranians have been teaching the Russians to employ some of these weapons, popularly known as suicide drones or technically known as loitering munitions like the Shahed 136, which can travel upwards of 1,000 kilometers, is against static targets. And it is precisely against those static targets that these drones have an outsized battlefield, political, and even psychological impact. And if the latest reports about Iran adding not just more drones to its exports to Russia, but potentially precision strike, short-range ballistic missiles, that could be a potential game changer.
And if it is a game changer, then how should the US president respond? Of course, Biden has responded as part of NATO in responding to Russian aggression. But when it comes to the Iranian question, what should he do?
Oh, well, there is so much more Washington needs to do. I mean, step number one, of course, is to actually tighten and enforce the sanctions that the Biden administration has inherited, but thus far has been relatively reluctant to do. Less revenues in general means more constraint for Iran's security apparatus. The fact that Tehran felt no constraints to begin with to export drones and potentially even missiles to the likes of the Russian Federation, A, is historic, but B, tells you how comfortable the regime is surviving under the very limited pressure it has. And two, of course, is to go after the full supply chain, whether it's those who procure, produce, or proliferate elements or full components of the drones that Iran is using inside, that Iran is producing and ultimately proliferating to the likes of Russia. And lastly, it's to make sure that on the battlefield, there are the tools, basically the short-range air defense systems, such as the CRAM would be a good example, that the Ukrainians have access to these and are able to continue shooting down large numbers of these drones. So you want to go after the entire supply chain, how they're procured, how they're produced, how they're proliferated, as well as offset and defeat them on the battlefield.
Well, taking a look then at the Western response more broadly, can I ask you, why do you think the US has actually been slower to act on this issue than the UK, than the European Union, for example?
Well, the European Union and the UK on the Iran threat more general has significant room for improvement, as currently does right now the Biden administration. Both sides of the Atlantic have unfortunately looked at Iran through primarily the nuclear prism. Iranian nuclear escalation, plus the 1.5 months of protests, plus right now, of course, the widening radius of Iranian drone and potentially ballistic missile proliferation should sharpen the best and the brightest minds in the transatlantic community to meet and challenge and defeat those threats posed by the Islamic Republic. So I think right now, is the time to marry one's heads and one's heart on the Iran issue and realize that these problems posed by the Islamic Republic will not be contained to the Middle East, as we see the spillover right now in Ukraine. So time to do away with that nuclear-centric framing that has long dominated policy discourse on both sides of the Atlantic.
Do you think it has been having an impact, though, in terms of sanctions and response to the proliferation of these weapons?
If I had to borrow a phrase from a noted political scientist, I would say the sanctions thus far on the counter-drone program and the counter-precision strike program have been ornamental and not instrumental. They're not even enough, in my view, to handcuff some of the worst elements of the regime's bad behavior. I think you have to go after the major sources of foreign financing, and once you have that, then begin a targeted designations campaign against those procurers, producers, and proliferators, as well as working with European countries and particularly even some Asian jurisdictions where Iran likes to go shopping for elements of its drone program to tighten export controls and move from not just blocking industrial access, but commercial access to some of these cheaper components that are making their way into Iranian drones.